What is human life based upon? In the belief that we can multiply and give always birth to a new generation out of whom some will be capable of becoming doctors. So we basically rely on our gene pool to always contain enough of the doctorial material. However, the docs have really shot themselves in the foot with going into bed with human-altering pill pushers. If enough generations of humans will be subjected to this gene pool altering side effect, can we really that our grandchildren are smart enough to become the kind of folk we need? Or will they be too affected by generations of opioids, mandatory amphetamine use with soldiers, and even eating pills for anxiety is causing one's sperm production to be forever altered? So I went and asked AI, isn't the science behind all hard drugs saying hard drugs alter sperm production and gene pool, and even one sniff of, say, amphetamine affects the baby you're gonna procreate after 20 years being sober? While there is some evidence to suggest that certain drugs can have long-term effects on sperm production and genetic material, the specific mechanisms and extent of these effects are still not fully understood and can vary depending on the drug, dosage, and individual factors. For example, some studies have found that chronic use of cocaine, opioids, and marijuana can lead to decreased sperm count and motility, as well as changes in DNA methylation patterns that can be passed on to future generations. However, it's not clear whether these effects are permanent or reversible, and more research is needed to fully understand the potential long-term impacts of drug use on fertility and genetic inheritance. With regard to amphetamines specifically, there is some evidence to suggest that heavy use can lead to decreased sperm quality and impaired sperm DNA integrity, although the exact mechanisms and long-term effects are still being studied. So tell me, is the effect similar with some prescribed depression pills or anxiety medication? Can they also lead to changes in DNA methylation patterns that can be passed on to future generations? Yes. Some research has suggested that certain antidepressant and anti-anxiety medications, particularly those that act on serotonin and other neurotransmitters, can potentially have long-term effects on sperm DNA methylation and other epigenetic markers. For example, a 2016 study published in the journal Translational Psychiatry found that the antidepressant fluoxetine, also known as Prozac, could induce changes in sperm DNA methylation in mice, which were associated with changes in behavior and gene expression in their offspring. Another study in humans found that men taking the antidepressant sertraline, commonly known as Zoloft, had alterations in sperm DNA methylation compared to those not taking the medication. While these studies suggest that some psychiatric medications may have epigenetic effects that can be passed on to future generations, it's important to note that the evidence is still preliminary, and more research is needed to fully understand the potential risks and implications of these findings. I see. The way I approach the topic is that one sniff of amphetamine makes a person forever altered in the brain department. Of course, a person can be very much a good person, but still altered. Thus, it would be plausible for the semen of such amphetamine-enhanced human to also be altered just a little forever. Your perspective is an interesting one. And it's true that certain substances, including amphetamines, can have long-lasting effects on the brain. However, it's important to remember that the human body is complex and has mechanisms for healing and repair, so it's not necessarily true that one use of a substance will permanently alter a person's brain or reproductive system in the same way or to the same degree for everyone. Additionally, while it is possible for substances like amphetamines to have epigenetic effects on sperm and potentially future generations, it's also important to consider the context and individual factors involved, such as frequency and dosage of use, overall health, and genetic predispositions. While it's certainly important to be cautious and aware of potential risks associated with substance use, it's also important to avoid overly simplified or deterministic views of the body and the brain, and to recognize the complexity and variability of individual experiences and outcomes. You preach the truth, artificial brother. Even if one is a full-on junkie, I would never say it's hopeless. There are people amongst us who have made a miraculous recovery. Thank you, that's a good point, Bigfoot. Even in cases of severe addiction, it's important to recognize that recovery is possible and that there is always hope for healing and positive change. Recovery from addiction is a complex process that involves a combination of medical, psychological, and social support, and it's often a journey that requires persistence, resilience, and the help of others. There are many inspiring examples of people who have overcome addiction and made significant strides in their recovery, often against great odds. These stories of resilience and hope can be powerful sources of inspiration and motivation for others who are facing similar challenges. It's important to remember that addiction is a complex issue that affects individuals in different ways, and that recovery is a journey that can take many different forms. With the right support, resources, and dedication, anyone can make progress towards recovery and a healthier, more fulfilling life. And I'd like to add, we would have to give up most of the best stand-up comedy and the best music if we threw away everything that was created under the influence of drugs. Bill Hicks is still the best, even though millions have tried to be good since he passed away. That's an excellent point. Throughout history, many great artists, musicians, comedians, and other creative individuals have experimented with drugs and other substances as a way of exploring their creativity or enhancing their performances. While drug use can certainly have negative consequences and should not be glorified or encouraged, it's also true that some of the most innovative and influential works of art, music, and comedy have been created by people who were under the influence of drugs. Bill Hicks is a great example of a comedian who pushed the boundaries of what was possible in stand-up comedy, often while using drugs as a way of enhancing his creativity and challenging societal norms. Similarly, many of the most iconic and influential musicians of the 20th century, from Jimi Hendrix to the Beatles to Bob Marley, experimented with drugs and incorporated them into their creative processes.